This is a rare opportunity for a former president and a present president to sit down amicably and to talk about some things that we have learned on our watch as presidents. And so, bless Wilson, he gave me the trust of crafting the questions. And so we'll have some fun as we talk about some of the things that were challenges to us. What were the do-overs we'd like to do, like not take the job? So we'll have some fun looking at these varied things. And as you know, Dr. Yates, he has prepared very, very thoroughly to respond. So we'll have some fun with this. So, Wilson, during the epoch in which you served as president, what were the issues on the social landscape that United was addressing?
Well, I think I would say race and the issues around the questions of race. There was women's rights or feminism or women's liberation, which was certainly at the fore by the time I was president. There was sexual identity, a broader area of sexuality, and undergirding that was Jim Nelson's work, and more particularly the emergence of gay, lesbian efforts to achieve some type of equity in the communities in which they lived and to which they contributed. Those were the issues, and they maybe are still the issues. The environment was there and becoming more present, but not to as great an extent as certainly it is now. We had tried some things, and to be very brief, we developed a church and race program, which created the White Racism Workshop. And I want to accent not a racism workshop, but a white racism workshop. And all our students in the regular master's programs had to go through that workshop. It was a controversial instrument, but I think in general it was an effective instrument. Some of you could testify to that one way or the other. But it was one way that we were contributing, hopefully, to the racial needs of our time. With regard to sexuality, I mentioned what Jim Nelson did. It was with the medical school and the sexuality program, and how that extended particularly into ethical questions of the rights of various groups, gay and lesbian, trans, and so on. The third one was, the last one was in the environment, and again, that was the issue, a issue, but not perhaps the issue. I want to make one comment about the school at this time, and some of you maybe remember, even indeed the beginning of the school. If there were theologians who were turned to in the beginning, that's the early 1960s, it was Richard Niebuhr and Reinhold Niebuhr and Paul Tillich, three white men, but as white men go, they weren't too bad. And there was also other schools of thought. But what that was contrasted against in terms of what was happening in a lot of theological education was neo-orthodoxy. And this school, while it taught, I think appropriately, neo-orthodox approaches, it did not become the method from which the school drew heavily. And so that continued, and it continued through my being president. But by this time, we had theologians, women theologians, we had women theologians on our faculty. And so let us say we had moved beyond that period, and we were moving into a much more diverse time and place. So there's where we were. I think maybe a sentence. When I was president, we still had the churches, and we had a seminary for the churches. And that had a solidity to it, a grounded to it. But the foundations, in part, were beginning to shake. And I think since I've been gone, the shaking has become more dramatic.
I think that's fair. Some of the issues that you've articulated remain. The horrible racism in a white culture that we chip away at, and yet we realize that this is a historically white school and that BIPOC students have to swim upstream often in making their way here, this persistent and pernicious kind of white supremacy that is operative throughout our culture. We name it more, but we are not well yet. I think there is a much more awareness of the reality of religious pluralism in our time than would have been on your watch, Wilson. Part of that is immigration. Part of that is good ecumenical work that moved beyond ecumenism to interfaith work, which I think is the challenge and the privilege and the opportunity of our day, to cultivate this respect for the lived religion of others. And so we are seeking to do that in a variety of ways that I'll speak about more in just a bit. I grieve that there aren't more women on the faculty. And the ones who have been here in the past are phenomenal scholars and made a pathway. But I don't grieve any of those that we have in our camp right now, for they are phenomenally good scholars, and they offer the range of reading and scholarship that points to the liberatory nature of what the best of theological education should be. So I won't rant further on that, but I want to hear some more from Wilson. You came out of the faculty, out of being the dean, to become the president. What did that feel like, and what were the challenges?
Well, it felt good, and I had been on the faculty, and I had been. Then I was a dean for 9 years, and I was very close to Ben Griffin. We worked together in some ways. Some tasks were not divided by office, but by personalities, because we were opposites, and that balance was an enjoyable adventure. I'd had some contact and work with the ATS, so probably I was more presumptuous than I should have been about taking this job. I campaigned for this job on one issue, that if we did not have a successful campaign, we would not last. And whether that's what got me the presidency or not, I don't know, but it did believe that that was true, and so that's what we were facing. But I thoroughly enjoyed being president, and would not want to do it again, but so that puts me out of any kind of competitive running. But nevertheless, I thought it was an amazing opportunity, and my failures are well known. There were a scattering of successes, and on balance, I retired tired but intact. So,
Amen. You know, our friend David Teedy over at Luther liked to say, well, the final goal of the presidency is to get out of it alive. And so I'm so grateful that you did so. What kind of culture did you attempt to create here at United?
Well, my word and the word of many of my colleagues was a dialogical community. Now, I think we need broader categories. I think if you want to put it in political terms, a seminary needs a balance of power, so that we didn't have an office or a person who could finally make decisions that were significant but had not been thoroughly or at least reasonably debated. So on one side, it was a balance of power amongst offices and the various groups. And politically, you see, it's complex because you start with students, and then you have faculty, and you have staff and administrators, and you have board people, and you have donors, and you have that ominous body, the church, which breaks down into churches, and then you've got a general public, and that's what the dance is about. How do you help keep them satisfied, but do so with integrity? So, you know.
Well said. My own desire is to create a healthy culture where people's gifts can flourish, where they are affirmed, where there is strong collaboration and welcome, and where there's a lot of joy and good humor, because I think that's an expression of the presence of the Spirit, where there's a lot of good humor and joy. But it's an expectant culture.
Right.
We do things with a sense of urgency because what we're about matters. Often when I sign a donor letter, I thank people for their gifts, and at the bottom I say, it matters that you participate in this mission because it is of significance. What are some of the hardest decisions you faced, Wilson?
Well, I think the one I remember came very quickly, and I've already said my assessment and the assessment of others was that the school could not last on an endowment of $4 million. And so we had to have a campaign, but we just had a campaign 4 years ago. So we had a feasibility study, and it said we could do another campaign. And so we started out. Now, there's a person not here today, but when we talk about such matters, he should be present, maybe is present in a certain way, and that's Jonathan Morgan. Right after I became president, I asked Jonathan to have lunch with me, and we had lunch. And I said, Jonathan, would you be the vice president for finance and development? And he said, I was just getting ready to ask, might I be selected by you? And that became such a close partnership. And I fear at times it's easy for the president to to be recognized for certain things. And if you really are honest, you say, that was Jonathan's doing, or it would not have been possible without Jonathan, and without a lot of others, but particularly John. And so we were a team in this effort. That campaign did work. In fact, we came up with $7.5 million. We went over, and that was an extraordinarily important thing to the donors and the board. That was a victory. And so that was the hardest, and that was maybe the most successful. Everything was downhill for the next 8 years. So.
Yeah. Well, I know that was a labor of love for you, Wilson, to have a major part, you and Jonathan and others, in creating the Bigelow Chapel, and then the challenge of departing something that you loved dearly.
What was the hardest decision you had?
Oh, my.
Or having? Speak delicately.
I think what Sherry put her finger on a moment ago remains a challenge for us. How we serve our historic UCC connection, and at the same time, we acknowledge that there is spiritual wisdom and there are spiritual seekers who do not fit into that tradition. And so how I speak to this remains for me a learning opportunity. How I do that with integrity as a confessional Christian who very much acknowledges and welcomes religious pluralism. And so day after tomorrow, I will speak at the Interfaith Action annual meeting. And I'll get to talk about how a Southern Baptist fundamentalist from northeastern Oklahoma became a thoroughgoing religious pluralist while remaining a confessional Christian. I'm sure they'll just be enthralled by the opportunity to hear such. Or they'll go ahead wagging their heads in derision, as the scripture says.
Well, the impossible happened. That's what they'll say.
You know, when I had been here only about a month, I was out with a board member and his wife, and she looked at me with a great quizzical look, and she said, "You're Baptist? How did you get to be this way?" And I would say being this way has been abetted by being at United. Every day is a stretching and a growing to learn from the various folk who are here. I face some of the same hard decisions as you, Wilson, because 46% of ATS schools are financially fragile. We are not an embedded, we are a freestanding seminary, which means that we depend upon endowment, we depend upon tuition, and we depend upon donors. And that is forever a relentless part of what I need to be about. And so decisions about how will I spend my time and what calls can I make and how to invite people to demonstrate the spiritual gift of giving. And I find that a privilege and a challenge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about educational delivery just a little bit, pedagogical, andragogical approaches. One has to do with the education of children, the other the education of adults, even though we sometimes use those back and forth. What was shifting on your watch here, Wilson, in terms of educational delivery?
Well, you know, this question came, how do you think pedagogical / andragogical approaches shifted during your time? Now, this only happened 2-3 days ago, and I didn't know what that word andragogical meant. And I trust all of you do, because you've had your Latin and you know your Greek roots and those things. But I thought it must mean it's rooted in androgyny. And Gail wrote What Women Want, and there were the liberationists and the feminists and the androgynous. So I had a whole thing worked out here that the pedagogy was moving in a way that took into account an androgynous view. But the president informed me kindly that that's not what it meant. And before we went on, which was very helpful. I would say this in a more serious vein. This seminary started as a school which had all-day classes. Is there anybody here who was no? Well, yes, that's right. The all-day class. And all right, we've got folks. It was a marvelous time because it was broken by study. It was broken, perhaps a lecture, discussion group, and a very seriously designed discussion group, the use of media, which Gene J. Berg offered insofar as people wanted it. And so pedagogically, as we would have said at the time, it meant that we believed that there were different modes of knowing in terms of the practice in the classroom, and they were a lecture. You hear, you listen, you take notes, you process. There were discussion groups, which was interaction, another mode of knowing, and the third was indeed media, or let us say those newer, technologically grounded ways of presenting information. And I think it would be fair to say that the faculty believed that those were three ways of knowing that students could greatly benefit from, and so we tried to provide that. Not every course, and some faculty members were better on one than the other, and it was a human community. Nevertheless, that was more the ideal, and when we moved to half-day courses and evening courses, we still tried to continue that model. And what it meant was, those of you who like a good lecture learned, and those of you who really depended on an interactive body with a well-designed group learned, and all of us who were being confronted with technological ways of presenting whatever it was in life that was being considered, we were learning something of what it was and its impact on us, our dependence upon it. Well, that's too long, but that was the backdrop of the pedagogy out of which we came. And I think a lot has changed since I left, and yet that's roughly where we were.
Well, I pose the andragogical dimension because adult learners, many of whom are already embedded in ministry or in some profession, take a greater interest in shaping and directing. You will often see one of our graduates who has an MA in directed studies. That means the person has shaped a thesis, shaped certain courses because of that student's own professional aspiration, perhaps PhD work or social service or whatever else. And so andragogy is simply the notion that adult learners have particular skills, giftedness that we want to acknowledge and invite as participants. One of the things about our Eco-Justice program is that it was a student-initiated emphasis. And we then had the good fortune that Dr. Munjed Murad has an MA in environmental studies from Yale before he did his work at Harvard in comparative religion. And so it's a wonderful thing that students help participate in the shaping of the curriculum. Now, I'm under no illusion that a student knows everything that student needs to learn when getting here. The faculty have a particular role in guidance and design and all of that, and yet the kind of participation that students have in this, I think, matters. Technologically, we are light years down the way from the kind of educational technology that was supporting the teaching and learning during your years. And our faculty have to be adept at all the different delivery methods. Synchronous, hybrid, some in the room, most on the screen. Asynchronous, it's like managing all of these different learners on different schedules and finding how to do all of that different delivery methodology. I told the faculty yesterday in faculty workshop that it was a good thing that I wasn't teaching these days, simply because of how quickly, rapidly the whole educational technology has shifted. And so we have wonderful platforms that support learning. And when the pandemic came, thanks be to God, we were already well down the road on knowing how to teach in that Zoom format, and the kind of platforms that we use through our website are pretty phenomenal. But it continues to evolve, and our faculty are quite gifted and continue to press to learn how to make the experience as good for the person at a distance as the person who is able to be in the classroom. Some data suggest that when everyone is on Zoom, it may be an even better experience than when there are some in the room and some not. But we continue to learn about that. Let's shift and talk about accreditation. You know, they are kind of, those bodies are ever with us, kind of like the IRS. And so let's think about how your experience of managing accreditation went during your years.
Well, I made an appointment. I had the dean do it, and so we went from there. But short of that, the dean and I did work very closely on it. What was happening with the ATS and was their recognition in using the figure you used a moment ago of how many schools live on the edge financially. And over 40% you said?
46%.
46%. That was not true when I was president. It was a much smaller group, but you could see it starting. And they were not prepared. They simply had some rules that put you in a difficult position, and you had to work from there. They became somewhat more supportive of the problem. They learned about the problem. I would say with the Department of Education's accrediting agency, that was a real difficult at times experience, because it was very hard for them to get inside a mode of how a school dealing with theological reflection actually worked. I was telling Molly, I'll tell it briefly. We had suddenly the team appeared. We'd already had an earlier team, which was good, but now we had this team appeared. It was like Mutt and Jeff. It was this little short fellow, and he was just angry, and he'd say, "Why do you put that picture on the wall?" And these people can't function out here because it would be too noisy. And it was just criticism after criticism. And then the other one was this real tall fellow, and he followed orders pretty much, and he was saying, yes, that's right, oh, that's right, and he would write everything down. Well, you know, in my mind, I was formulating a formal protest to the accrediting agency about who they had sent these nincompoops, and then we got the report, and it was like A+. And so I decided not to write the letter. Now, all of you have been to seminary and you've had ethics. Think about that. Think about that. Now, that's the price of being president. Enough of that.
Well, you know, I would assign it to the dean, but he assigned it to Matt. And so, you know, he's spared himself. Actually, all the leadership team working with Matt Stolenwork as well as Karen Smith-Sellers most recently wrote our Higher Learning Commission accreditation. We had a board member help us write it, and it was a very, very helpful thing, and we got A+ too this past November. I think accreditation has the challenge of feeling pressed from the Department of Education. And some of the for-profit schools that made huge promises have then compromised for all the rest of us how to keep accreditation afoot. I think University of Phoenix or Trump University or some of these others where they couldn't pass muster on the Gainful Employment Act and other things that the Department of Education would regulate. So it's made it more difficult. Now, we choose to be accredited by two bodies, as you know, the Association of Theological Schools, that's about 272 schools in the U.S. and Canada. And we are of varied ecclesial stripes, and it's important for us to do because we are a professional graduate school in theological education. But we are also accredited by a regional body. It used to be the North Central Association, the Higher Learning Commission there in Chicago. That is very helpful for our students who go to do further work, as well as those students who want to transfer, to have a duly accredited degree program. Gives them a bit of a leg up in terms of being abiding by the kind of expectations, criteria, and standards that accrediting bodies require of us. It's labor intensive, as you know. It is doing a deep dive in everything that an institution does. Now, if I'd been smart, I would have asked, where in the accrediting cycle are we before I took the job? But I wasn't. And we'll be doing ATS in just a couple of years. And so they are like they're like the cousins who kind of never go away. They continue to return. But it's important. But it is a galloping regulatory environment, as you know. The fact that we give federal loans means that we have to satisfy a number of hoops to be able to do that. I once worked under a president who thought if he could just swing by ATS headquarters in Pittsburgh and schmooze a bit, that they would go easy when they came and made the official visit. Well, not so. It's a very stringent process that we have to do.
Well, I was trying to think of an analogy or a metaphor or something, and you know, when they went through this bit about souls and spines and so forth, what I thought of was that you're the soul, and I'm the Holy Spirit, and he's the Christological embodiment. And the ATS and an occasional denomination are the devils that run around loose.
Cover your ears, Reverend Prestamon.
Don't hold me to that, but
yeah.
It is what I thought.
Well, metaphor is lost on you, evidently. So, yeah. And I sent you these questions well over 2 weeks ago, not 3 days ago, just to be clear on this.
I did. I tried to be. What did I did? I prayed and I thought about it. And
Wilson, you are giving us just a great gift, even being here. We asked Wilson, did he want to take a pass on this after the recent grief? And he said, no, I want to do it. And so that generosity of spirit means a great deal. And I like to be likened to the Holy Spirit or the whatever. All right. Let's talk about some favorite memories. Some of the favorite memories on while you did this work.
I did Reed and I came up with three. I think the building of the chapel was a pivotal one for me, and that can be laid to rest, but that's what works still in me. But a second was being able to get foundation funds to initiate new programs. And you work at that, and you don't work alone, but when it comes through, it's awfully exciting. And we did that for the programs we initiated. Everything from the women's studies, which got a major grant from a graduate of this school, and the arts program had over $1.5 million spread over 20 years, and so forth. And I rather enjoyed it. You know, you learn niches that you're relatively good at, and you apply them. And so that I spent some time on. I think the third one was the ecumenicity of the school, which continued to change. And you're dealing with a much more complex situation than I had. The key was this was a seminary. This was the only UCC seminary created by the UCC, and it was done in Pittsburgh am I right, at the, whatever the meeting was. Marianne, you worked for the UCC, you know this history, and so here we were, and we were created to be an ecumenical seminary. But in the lived world, the UCC wanted to own us in a good sense of that word. And they also could be threatened by the ecumenical push. And then on the ecumenical side, you had denominations saying, yes, but we're really second-class citizens to the UCC. And so that's what you bounced about. That either one of the best compliments or terrible judgments I ever had was from Lance Barker. Lance Barker said that I could say in a paragraph words that would satisfy the UCC that it was truly still a UCC seminary, and I could satisfy the other denominations that it was truly an ecumenical school of the first order. And I never knew how he meant it, but you know, we live in a world of ambiguity. Is there a UTS word better than ambiguity? And in the president's office, ambiguity was the dance that I had. So there were lots of favorite memories, but those are three of them. And you, Madam President? I didn't say you were the social. I said I was the Holy Spirit. I said you were the soul.
I'll take that too. Very good. I just go into high gear at commencement. I just think that is the demonstration of the mission of the school. And so we're just a week out, a little over a week out from commencement, and we had such a glorious time. And particularly, there were a couple of years, where we just weren't able to gather. So we had one Zoom commencement here in the chapel. It was hilarious. The faculty did a procession, and we looped around the room a time or two, and then Tracy Blackman was on the screen, and we honored former Governor Mark Dayton. Even that was fun, but nothing like entering Plymouth to the sound of the organ and just honoring our folk. I have become a great fan of the arts practicum. I think it is a phenomenal thing that Dr. Oz Freeman coordinates, and it draws community folk here. And the creativity of our students and their awareness that creativity is a part of being in the image and likeness of God is a beautiful thing to behold. And I am pretty astonished by what they are able to create and the depth and the perception with which they craft certain things. I'm a fan, of course, of the rule of St. Benedict, which says, let the artist always have a place in the community. Now, if that artist gets a little snotty or arrogant, then they need to be brought back into line, Dr. Alls Freeman. However, let the artisan have a place of honor in the community. I think we do that well here, and I think it suffuses so many of the other things that we do. Favorite memories, goodness, when I hear a student preach, when I see a student lecture as a teaching assistant, when I see a new faculty member begin to speak with depth and gravitas and find voice and place and vocation in this hospitable context, that makes my heart rise up. And so those are some of my favorites over these 2 years. Well, here's time for mea maxima culpa. Do you remember your Latin, Wilson?
Yes.
My fault, my most grievous fault. If you had any do-overs on any decision or matter, what might it be?
Well, when I, the last few years, I was president for 9 years, so you do see changes in the society, and we saw them. We saw them in theological education, and what I said earlier, there were cracks in the foundation, at least is the way we had structured the building. And I wish I had moved more quickly in responding, for example, to the slow loss of students going particularly into the MDiv program, by encouraging and supporting the dean in the development of some new programs. For example, it was a hard time, and still is, in the parish. The question we should have asked better, how can we help? What can we offer? And we did, and we didn't. And I wish that we had done so more deliberately. I wish I had politicked more with the heads of denominations, partially for the same reason, it was to enhance that we were here, but to enhance that we were here to help. See, I think it's a difficult balance, a tightrope almost, where do the churches help the seminary stay alive and vital? Does the seminary help the churches stay alive and vital? And I wish that I had tilted it more on that side. I had a sentence here. I read this sentence just a minute ago. I'm not quite sure what precipitated, but I'm going to read it. I would have done this meaning new initiatives and a press on the ecumenical side. I would have done this deliberately so that we didn't yield to either forces on the left or forces on the right who wish the school to foreclose on its open and ecumenical yet grounded identity. Robert Bella once wrote an essay in which he said that the far left and the far right have more in common than that wide swath in the middle, because they're absolutist, because they have the truth. I want this seminary to still live in that world of ambiguity. As Niebuhr titles the chapter, Having and Not Having the Truth. And that's who we are, and that's where we are. And our task is to try to keep our eyes on the truth that we can see. Now that's a little sermon. We could develop that maybe. I don't know. You do that when you have a sermon idea and you're driving in the car. you stop the car and write it down, or maybe you just write it down and keep driving. I don't know how you all do it. But
No, I whip out TikTok and start preaching it. At that point.
Well, you've got the edge on me. You know, I do want to take this opportunity before she answers this question. I want to say that I think now in theological education, we are facing things that are much more difficult, much harder. You are living in an ocean, and the boat is not large, and how to navigate those storms, that's not easy. And so when, by the grace of God, we got you, we are delighted to have you.
Amen.
And so...
I probably could talk more about do-overs from my 16 years as president at Central, and it'll probably be for those who follow me here to talk about the do-overs that I probably should have done. Thanks for your generous remark. People have given me a good ride here, meaning we know we have things to do. We know that certain things need to be the priority that you take on as a transitional person, quite frankly. I came out of retirement, out of mothballs, to do this work. I had been retired about 9 months and had been writing a commentary, and thankfully finished it before I started. But every president thinks about how do you say things that are both affirming and challenging? How do you evoke a culture of well-being in which persons see a healthy community and then they are equipped to form healthy communities? I think that's what so much the church needs. Recently read a little book by a fellow much more conservative than I, Scott McKnight, who teaches up at Northern Seminary. It's a little book called A Church Called Tove. Basically, what is the goodness culture that we are seeking to instantiate in whatever community we are in? And so, amidst the complexity of the challenges, if we can cultivate a culture of goodness and respect and welcome and acknowledgement, I think we will have gone a long way toward toward being a part of the formation of healthy leaders, which the church and society so need in our time.
Yeah.
I find our students and our faculty exhilarating in their wisdom and in their expertise, and so to be here is a challenge to keep up, to try to continue to learn. Carolyn talked about what she had learned from her students. I could talk about what I learned from faculty colleagues, what I learned from other administrators. Surround yourselves by people smarter than you, and you will not be disappointed in that. We've got about, 10 minutes left. And Meg, I don't know if you've got a mic, but I think let's just open this up. Let's clap for Wilson, first of all.
I want to say how grateful I am to have come to United when Wilson was dean, and to have served when Wilson was president. because my experience of you, Wilson, is that you did everything you could so that the seminary lived the values that we taught. And there is nothing more important to me than that. I was in a meeting with you and Mary Bednarowski my first year, and I came from Princeton, which was a wonderful place. I had really faculty of faith who had enormous integrity, but I would not say that the institution sat around and thought, now how can we teach in a way and how can we examine people in a way that combines love and justice? And my jaw dropped when the first thing you said was, now let's see, there's love and there's justice. How do we make an MA exam that embodies both? I just almost couldn't believe it. And that's my experience of how you led this seminary. And Molly, I don't know if I can say this without crying, but you have given us our seminary back because you lead with the passion and the faith and the ethical values that we try to teach. And I see you, just the way you talked about it, to create the good. I didn't hear that the last few years, or if it was said, I wasn't listening right. And I am so, so, so grateful.
Wilson, Molly referenced the arts, but you played a part before you were president, before you were dean with the arts. Would you share a few moments about that experience? Because that was, for me, that was brand new when I came in '76 and in those years. And that was, you were getting started in that.
Yeah. Well, we for one thing, we had a faculty that used the arts and were open to the arts. You know, Clyde Steckel's sitting right there, and he would be one of them, and was one of them. And so to develop a program, you already had the support of your faculty and the openness of your students. What I got was a Lilly grant to write a book that analyzed where we were in theological education. And so using ATS schools, or some of them, I think we did 148, but from the different ranges of schools, I wrote the book, and it gave us some insight as to what schools did with what art form. And we don't need to break that down. Music was the first art form. And the visual arts was down near the last. The last was dance. And so literature was very high. And so we developed our own program in which we wanted to accent, not limit, but accent the visual arts. And you need a publication. So I got some money from where? I got some more money from Lilly, and then we got some money from Luce Foundation to develop what became arts. And it was, first it was 8 pages, and the next issue was 16 pages, and pretty soon we had a journal of sorts underway, and that is what it's become. And then we developed programs here. Underlying this was, what could we do as a seminary in dealing with churches, or responding to churches, or meeting what churches wanted. And churches were responsive. You know, selective churches were doing exciting things. We borrowed from them, and we showed churches how they could do exciting things. And, or at least we helped them find that. So, I don't, does that give you a sense? And you came in early in this whole effort, and I taught in the area, and Cindy Beth came in to really work with that program, and she was well. When you give Cindy Beth a program, you better watch out, because it's gonna get big, and it did. And then Jennifer Alsfreedom was brought in, and so we've maintained this, thank heavens. And I think we really are only at the beginning stages in terms of what might be possible.
I'm Judy Lang, and I'm going to speak on behalf of the lay staff. While I was here, I was Director of Finance and Administration. But under Wilson, we have a faculty, we have a staff, and we have a group. And by that I mean we were asked as staff to know the faculty, to become a group where they knew what we were doing. And that was very important because often it's this and this. And I don't see that having changed. Or if it changed for a while, it's back, I think. And so I think that's very important for the staff that work here to be part of that whole development of the seminary, and I appreciate that. And I'll admit I strayed away a little while, for a while, and I told Molly earlier today I really appreciate the fact that she has invited me to be on the campaign committee, and it's been just wonderful to come back and see this great organization.
I always tell Judy when there's an award given or something and she has received one, it was in the budget, just to make sure that she's okay on that. We work among really good people here. Kyle is a splendid dean. I mean, just a splendid dean. The beautiful things that happen around here, the events, the gatherings, Cindy Beth is at the heart of that. And Jeff Swenson keeps the trains running in terms of producing the financial statements and dealing with the immense regulatory things we have to deal with and dealing with our taxes and all the rest of that. And so to work in the midst of an aligned and very good team is a wonderful thing. And I think the culture of affirming staff, we continue to gather each month in seminary council so that everybody kind of has the same information. It's not this trickle down that doesn't splash on everybody. It's much more egalitarian in that way, which I appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Judy mentioned that, well, if I understood you correctly, what you were saying was we didn't have the top-down levels, but rather we were all a part of a circle, and we had a place. And if this person left or if this went bad, it all went bad. And so I think we lived with that and lived with it pretty successfully. We were at a crucial change point, which is not one of those things that you put in the paper, but that was, we had uneasy hiring practices, and we had ill-defined expectations, and Judy took that on and really made that office a responsible office of an institution in higher education. And once again, you know, it's not a great, it's not the hoorah things, it's the good, hard, deliberate work that happens, and we've moved further as an institution as a consequence.